Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Corbett Hoenninger. Corbett is the U.S. Managing Director at Argotec. He is an accomplished aerospace executive with over 20 years in the space industry. He was a key member of the original Dream Chaser engineering team at Sierra Space and pioneered the Sierra Space Astronaut Training Academy. Corbett worked at NASA Johnson Space Center on the Space Shuttle and International Space Station programs and was a semi-finalist in the 2016-2017 astronaut selection. Corbett, welcome to the Future Space.
Oh, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Can't wait to learn a little bit more about that training program. But before we get there, would you mind sharing with us, for you, three words that captures the essence of space?
Absolutely. Most important, excitement. And excitement brings innovation. And then to make it all happen, gumption. I love gumption. We don't use that word enough.
Wait, say that again, the third word?
Gumption,
Gumption.
right? Gumption is basically having the fortitude to do something when it's really, really hard and you know it's hard, but you're going to keep doing it anyways. Sometimes I call it being too stupid to quit.
I think we're just gonna have to make sure that there's a hyperlink or a link to the definition in the. It's the first time you're officially owner of the first word for space. So today is a premiere. Um, was space always something that you looked up? I mean, you have 20 years of experience in the space industry, obviously with NASA, and then into the private with Sierra Space and now Argotec. Was that a career path that was set from the beginning, or you ended up in space more as an accident?
It's the latter. I wish I could say that I dreamed it my whole life and I'm doing what I did, dreamt as a kid. My father was a spy plane pilot, and I think that kind of put a seed in the back, but it really didn't spark itself until later on. I always tell everybody there's a phenomenon in physics called the random walk or the random drunken walk, and it's how you get from here to here without a straight line, and it's just randomly how you get there. And that's how my career went. And a lot of times it was I found an opportunity and I jumped on it because it sounded super exciting to me and something that I wanted to pursue. So I ended up in aerospace because I was studying psychology and decided psychology wasn't for me after 3 years, and went to the library and started looking through the different careers I could do, and I never got it out of the A's. And I found aeronautical engineering and aerospace just sounded way cooler, and so I did that. And then just opportunity after opportunity, and like the old saying is, luck is where preparation meets opportunity, and I've been very lucky.
So you went from psychology to engineer. I mean, the aerospace was on the engineer level. So you went back to school, or you diverted your path and focused on engineering, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. I had to take a lot of leveling classes to get there.
When you were talking about the fly, it reminded me of the. Did you ever read about the experiment when you take a clear bottle and you flip it upside down, and if you put a bee, the bee will be looking up, will be basically aiming its direction towards the light, towards the sun. So it will go to the bottom of the bottle, right? It's upside down, and will try keep going in that direction until it dies. But a fly will just fly everywhere until it finds out that, oh, you can go through the opening which is at the bottom, and will find its way out. So sometimes it's a metaphor to be careful about being just focused on one thing, because it might not take you to where you want to go.
Now, I hadn't heard that, and I actually love that analogy. That's great.
Corbett, space is really interesting. I mean, for a long time, space was a political story. It was a space race with the Russians, and then it became it was a story that was stuck between, I think, eras, and not exactly knowing what to do because the incentives had changed. Now with the commercial, the private being in the game, the story's changed. There's a science, there's the technology, but beyond that, what would be for you the human story of going to space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the age old, it's the dream, right? It's the dream that's, if you ever had a dream that was so vivid that you believed it was real, I think that's what it is. It's why we want to explore, why we want to see what's around the next corner. It's a thriller, It's something that it inspires us to want to go do it. Why do we climb Everest? Why do we go visit Antarctica? Why do we go do these things and we can see pictures? Because as humans, we want to experience it ourselves. We want to be there. We want to be able to float. We want to be, inches away from the vacuum and coldness of space, and just feel that we want to feel what it is to be on a rocket, and the excitement and the danger, because that's what makes life worth living. And so I really think it's the dream, and trying to make that dream a reality, which we are so close today, closer than we've ever been as we transition from space exploration to space inhabitization.
Do you think that really where we are today is different than any previous beginning of exploration? I mean, some compare this new era of exploration to the beginning of the ocean exploration. Some people say absolutely not. You cannot compare ocean, right, to space. But if we look at it to what the challenge represented back in those days, right, they didn't have longitudes. A lot of people died in the process. They didn't understand all the process. So for them, it seemed impossible. Today, do you think that like space is really a different thing, or it's just that for now, this is what is impossible for us? But in 50, 75, 100 years, we'll look back and we'll think, oh my God, it was just so primitive back in those days, if they knew.
Yeah, I think everything cycles. I think you're exactly right with the ocean voyages, and I would also even include the Pony Express Act, in the early American history. But if you think about it, what was the problem with longitude? What was the problem with the funding? The government came in and provided the seed money for the longitude. They provided all this seed money for these people to develop these clocks that would be able to enable them to determine longitude. And you see what happened shortly after that. And then the same thing with airplane travel, right? The Pony Express Act really helped out the commercialization of airplane travel. Um, and I see we're seeing the same thing now with space travel. We're at the forefront of that, where the commercialization of it, all these space entities, they are realizing that they can't make money off the vehicles or anything they do, and that the commercial companies, it's going to be cheaper for them to own it and then to use buy space as a service. So we're at the forefront of that. And, in the next 20, 30, 40 years, I think you'll see that it'll be more and more commonplace.
Yeah, people tend, I mean, they do forget. I think that we forget to look into history because that arc, right, of these era of exploration or even technology, the governments and the rich people are always involved. Right? Back in the days of even ocean exploration, it was the kings and the queens who could fund these expeditions. It was resource driven also. Like if we look at Europe, they had run out of a lot of things, and now they were risking a lot to go and find new places. But the kings and the queens were the ones funding it because they could afford it. And then after that, the commercial went in, and you have the big English companies who became one of the biggest monopoly in the world. But that arc, right, is the same, and we can see it here with the space industry, where the governments were involved first. People ask, why is it that it took so long to go back to the moon? And it's just that the incentives were not there. So you didn't have the commercial capacity, and great, we had been to the moon, so now what? Until the commercial basically came in, and now there's a different incentive. And it will never go back. Right now that you have the commercial incentive, it can sustain itself in moving forward, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. To your first point, when I was talking about longitude, right? It was the Royal Astronomical Society, I believe, they were the one who put the money up for the innovation. So they drove the innovation for our modern day watches. The Rolex. And so it was from that government agency. So absolutely, you are correct that once we get there, and there's profit to be made, then it'll never come back from the commercial entity, because there is profit to be made, and everybody's going to try to make profit off of it, which is a good thing, which is definitely a good thing, because then it drives the innovation, and now you have more entities than just NASA or just ESA or any of these that are trying to push it. You have multiple, and we see with SpaceX what they're doing. They're all the amazing things that they're doing, and as quickly as they're doing it, government would never act that fast. And so this is why it's vastly important for a commercial to take over. But the problem with the commercial is it's very expensive, and most companies are going to go broke trying to do it if they don't have a good plan, and if the government doesn't seed it a little bit and help out to get them started. I mean, that's how Boeing got its start. That's how a lot of the airlines got their start, right?
It seems to me that you actually read that book, that little book, Longitude.
I loved it. I love that book. So my favorite books. There's another one called The Mapmaker's Wife, which is kind of based on that, but then it also has the exploration of the Amazon, where after they did all the science, they tried to find longitude. Then they ended up his wife, who he married, who was local to the area, ended up having to go down the Amazon to get back to him. Great, those are two great books.
It's that book is like short and sweet, but so enlightening in the fact of something that we take so much for granted. And then I was recently in Edinburgh, and at the castle of Edinburgh, there's a cannon that was used until, recently to establish time as the ships were navigating. It's fascinating. Have you ever been to Scotland, Edinburgh?
No, no, it's one of those bucket list things. It's when I retire, I always say that, okay, I'm going to go do all those fun things. But I'm having fun now, so I don't need to retire.
Corbett, now I see how the dots are connected from in your career and then in your developing, pioneering the astronaut academy, training academy, because of the psychology really aspect of it. What was the core pillars of that training, and what were you trying to develop into these individuals who wanted to be astronauts?
Yeah, so I started my career training astronauts for NASA, then I worked in mission control afterwards. So I got to see both sides of it, which was really fun. In fact, one of your guests, Massimino, I trained him for his last shuttle mission to Hubble. So that was one of the greatest experiences of my life, being able to do that. And then later I was able to design the vehicle, design the Dream Chaser, right? And really, what I learned from all those experiences is that less is better. We teach the NASA astronauts to be all incapable, all encompassing, and do everything. But I'll give you an example of what drove me. So it was on the STS-117 mission, and I was training the commander on how to engage the backup system in case of emergency. And this was it's never been engaged, and it's the button that you push, and it's, hey, worst case scenario, you hit this, and you pray, that it works. And so he comes in and he goes, I've studied this. I've got all the logic and the loops and everything figured out. And you can ask me and I can trace this. And this was the history of what the instructors would do to try to show how smart they are, was to try to put all this knowledge. And I sat there and looked at him and I said, in time of emergency, are you going to rebuild this in flight? And he's like, no. And I said, okay. So what happens if it no worky? You hit it and no worky, right? Kind of dumbing it down. He goes, oh, well, I hit this button and I flip this switch, hit the button again. That's what you need to know. Everything else I teach you, you are never going to use it doesn't help you in your mission. It doesn't help you with anything else. And it takes away from other opportunities you have to be able to be a much better engineer, a much better, because when you're in space, you're everything. You're the janitor, you're the IT, you're the cook, you're everything. So everything I try to take away from this one little thing takes away from all the other things you can do. And so that's what I really wanted to instill. The biggest stuff is I wanted to ensure, can you actually handle it? Do you know what it's like to go on a rocket or to be in space? What can I do to simulate those things as much as possible? Because the time for you to say, I can't go on this rocket ride, is when it's about to launch. Sorry, it's going. And then the other thing is when you're up there, it's not like you can just stop your trip. You're up there until your ride home goes, because it's very, very expensive to get people home. So the more we can instill in those people what that actually is going to be like, the more we can get them to say, maybe it's not for me. I don't know if I can do this. And then the other thing is how to stay safe, right? Because it's a home, but it's a home with unique, aspects to it. So how do you get around the home and stay safe under all conditions? You really need to know that. And then the final thing is that because you're in such close quarters with all your coworkers, how do you do your work while they're doing their work and not interfere with each other? And it's a dance. Imagine two people dancing at the same time on the same floor, and they run into each other and they ruin each other's dance, right? Well, that's what happens in space sometimes if you don't have a choreograph to the minute, where this person's working on here, but you wanted to do it because that sounded like fun. And this is really when we're getting at some of the tourists. How do they get to do the things they want without interfering with the other things? And so it's a choreograph. Okay, I get to use it these times, you get to use it here. How do we work together? So those are the biggest things that I wanted to instill, because other than that, everything else is, it's just gee whiz fun. Hey, what are those stars? What am I looking at in the Earth? That doesn't affect the mission. It just makes the time go by better.
Do you think that's one of the challenges today in our society, and the way that we bring a younger generation into being so conformed into a path that is static, right? That there's here's where you have to go, this is how you have to do it, and there's no there's a lack of resilience, right? If that path is not really does not happen, then they just don't know what to do. Because ultimately, I think this is what is great about our species is that we figure things out. We break things, we fix things. I mean, life is messy by design. There's the path to innovation is exactly the same path to a mistake. The only difference is the hindsight. But we figure things out and we need an incentive to create that desire to get outside of that comfort zone because change is by definition not fun or not easy for most of the people. And if we think of the conservation of energy, change requires an added energy to do something else, but this is what we do, right?
Yeah, one of the things, and you hit the nail on the head right there. One of the things that I see new engineers coming in is they want a path. Their whole life, they've had somebody explain this is what you do on day one and day two and day three, and this is how you get to be president of the company in 10 years, right? Uh, and they want that. They just want that and they want to follow that and execute that. Well, the problem is, like you said, it's kind of the random drunken walk because what you start off with is not what you may end up with. I always try to tell people do internships so you can really, and in the internship, try to jump around everywhere you can so that you know what you like. I mean, my first master's was in computational fluid dynamics, and I'll tell you what I learned from that. I learned I didn't want to do that as a career. I learned a lot of science and I learned a lot of engineering, but I most importantly learned that didn't want to do that as a career. And so when they come out of college and they get into these positions, they just stuck and they grind it out and they grind it out, and it becomes a job. It's not something that they really, really love because they didn't get to experience anything else. They just took the job. I will say, though, that the other interesting aspect of that is when companies don't provide that, you see these young engineers jumping around to the company they think that does provide it. Oh, this is the next step, and they're going to teach me until that one fails, and they jump around, and they're more willing to jump around to find the company that will guide them to where they want to be more than the older generation, my generation used to. We used to always say that, well, your skills would be recognized by your superiors because you kick butt. And so, that mentality's changed. That's in itself isn't bad because they're at least not afraid to change if they want to find the thing that they think they need. The problem is really got to get them to take control of their own destiny and take the opportunities.
The mindset when I did a lot of mentorship and using nature, right, as a framework for transformation of that. I'm putting you in a river. Life is a river. You're going to go in one direction. Sometimes you can go back up a little bit, but you know where about to start. Not too sure exactly where you're going to end up. I can't predict and I can't tell you what's ahead other than there's going to be some ups and downs. There's going to be some failures. You're going to capsize. You're going to enjoy it. There's going to be some rapids. There's going to be some places where you're like, it's not moving. I can't tell you any of this, what order is going to happen. But what I can do is I can give you the skills to turn every opportunity for growth and for learning. That is, and that's the best that I can do. The rest is up to you to figure it out. But today I think that I was even surprised to hear that in school, in some programs, you have to show your path, how you came up to the answer. And if it's not the path that's been approved, then you're not getting the correct grades. And I'm like, you have to encourage a certain sense of creativity in how to find those answers. Was that a different culture that you've noticed between, you've been in NASA, which is more government culture, to Sierra Space, and now with Argotec, and I do want to find out what you guys are doing at Argotec. But the difference of culture of how the solutions would be incentivized.
Yeah, so with government companies or government entities, your job is pretty secure, especially if you're a civil servant. So you find that a lot of people get in there, they stall. I know people that I worked with in training, and they're still doing the exact same job 20 years later because it's safe and they don't have to worry about it. They don't have to do change. So that's one aspect of it. I think the other piece is and by the way, I love that river analogy because I'm going to add two things to your river analogy. One, you teach them how to read the river, right? How to read the V, how to know where Route 66 is on that river. And the other piece is when there's an obstacle in the river, right? What do? You lean into it. You don't lean away. If there's a tree leaning over, you don't lean away because you're going to flip your boat. So you lean into it. And whenever there's an obstacle in your way in your career path, you got to lean into it and you got to attack it as if, it's an opportunity. And so what I always tell them is when you're really looking for that next position and the next step, take the one that makes you grow the most in a way that you want to grow. Look at all the opportunities for you. Don't look at the one that you've done that unless that's just your passion, right? But look at the one that's going to make you grow, whether it's a challenge or whether you're taking on a whole new side that you've never worked, a business aspect, and you're an engineer, whatever it is. Take the one that interests you, but allows you to grow, because then you can take the next one to grow and the next one to grow. And so I think that's vastly important as they mature through their careers.
When people say often, it's like, oh no, today it's more complicated because things are going faster and the dangers are much more in your face. I'm like, but so is our capacity to respond and to address them. Like the challenges don't increase separated from us, right? It's a constant reciprocity. And I tell people, it's like, listen, when you're a baby, the only thing that you can climb is this little hill. Right? You kind of crawl your way to the top of the hill. And if you fall off the hill, it's not a big deal. You kind of roll off. As you get older, you start climbing higher and higher to, the day where you're climbing Everest. Well, you are now on Everest, but you're not the baby anymore. Your skills have also evolved. And yes, on Everest, you could literally step off the path and you die, but your skills are matching, the environment and where you're in. And this is the type of, perspective that we have to remind people. The world is going faster, so is our capacity. The world is becoming more complex, so is our capacity to address that complexity. I mean, now we're sending these rockets up in space and lining up right, and we have thousands of people waking up every morning trying to find solutions. Corbett, tell me, so Sarah Space, right? And now at Argotec, a lot of your job at Sarah Space was with the astronaut. You had a lot of psychology. Are you still predominantly using the psychology now at Argotec, or you're dancing on a different foot?
You're always using psychology. I don't care what field you're in. Whenever you deal with people, you're always dealing with psychology, right? You're trying to understand is why are these people doing these things, or even if you're trying to get new business, what do I think is the most important aspect of what they're looking for in terms of what we're providing? So you're always using that. You're just using it differently to your advantage. Um, so Argotec, when I left Sierra, I really was intrigued by Argotec. One, because it allowed me to grow. It's an Italian company. It's been around for about 16 years now, and they've had a couple of really good successes in space. They flew the first CubeSat to visit an asteroid with the NASA DART mission. And so when NASA ran into the asteroid to try to redirect it, our satellite went along with as the paparazzi. We got to take all the pictures in real time and send them back. So that was pretty cool. And also went with Artemis around the moon. But what it allowed me to is to grow in a way that I've never grown before, in the sense that I've never taken a company and started it in the U.S. for another company from the ground up. I was employee number one. I had to find out every little aspect of it that I usually took for granted in terms of the company. And so, how do we get medical? How do we get retirement? Where do I locate the facility? How many staff do I need? What market are we really going after? And the vision for Argotec, which I really really liked, is the company really was trying to do an infrastructure in space. A lot of these companies like, look, I'm just going to sell rockets. I'm going to sell rockets. What I really like about it is that they have the small satellite platform, and then they have this radio that they're working with NASA as well. And the infrastructure that we're trying to put together is a communication constellation around the moon in the next 5 to 6 years. Because if you think about it, if somebody's on the backside of the moon, right, the dark side of the moon that never faces Earth, how do they communicate with Earth? Because right now our communication is direct line of sight to Earth. So you don't have that communication, or in certain times on the polar regions, they don't, because of the tilt and all that, they don't have direct access to Earth all the time. So by putting the infrastructure in place, now you're ensuring the communication, and that helps build up what we were talking about earlier. It helps. The more infrastructure you have, the more you're going to have people to be able to take advantage of that, and more innovation, and then bring more people out there to explore. And so I think a city doesn't get laid out without the electrical power and without the communication and without the utilities and services and all that. And so I think companies like Argotec that are really focusing on providing that infrastructure is what's going to be the next enabler.
You're employee number one on the US side, and it's an Italian company. There's a lot of discussions about the difference of culture between the European mindset, the relationship with risk and culture here in the US. What do you think that the US is bringing or, to Argotech in terms of different culture that sometimes, you think that you like it, but when you face and you deal with it, it's a different thing. How is it evolving with you and Argotech?
So one thing I'll say is our CEO and founder, David Avino, he's very, very open to learn. And that's what drew me into this, right? You could have a conversation with him, he listens, and he's really, really open. So as long as, an old colleague of mine who's no longer with us, said, best facts and figures will set you free. You put it out before him, and if you can show the case, then he accepts it. And in terms of risk as well. So I do think we bring forth a level of risk acceptance that the Italians are not used to. I think the other thing we bring forth is an idea of thinking bigger. They tend to think a little bit small, and I think it goes hand in hand with risk, right? They don't want to get too big because then it's too risky. So we bring an idea of thinking a little bit bigger and a little bit more grandiose, what we can actually accomplish. And then I think the last thing really is there's a lot more money in the U.S. being thrown into space than anywhere else. And as a U.S. company, we have a lot more opportunities than as a foreign company to get into that directly. So especially with defense, you know, uh, really putting some of these satellites up just to do early warnings. What's going on in the rest of the world? What they call the transport layer is like, hey, how do I enable again the infrastructure? How do I enable this web in space so that any of their other assets can talk to each other quickly and we can understand what's going on in the world?
It's fascinating. I mean, if you really stop and try to understand like achievements like the one where your company was involved, which we hit an asteroid that was moving that was moving in space. First of all, you have to target the asteroid, and then you have to understand where it's going to be when all these players are moving super fast, and then you're sending this satellite that's hopefully, cross fingers, gonna hit it, and then you have another one who's following it so you can take pictures, and everything worked flawlessly. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's the choreograph, and unlike other things where you have to launch within a certain time to hit it. Because if you don't launch it, you, you don't make it. It's gone. It's too far away, and you don't have enough propulsion to hit it. So there's a lot of choreograph with that, and you're right. Things just have to work out just right in order for it to all happen. And a lot of it is preparation and doing everything you can to ensure testing, testing, testing. You can never test enough because you're always going to find something in space that, oops, I didn't test for that. And so it's just to reduce every risk you can and choreograph it as much as possible, and then also something with a little bit of luck.
Correct. What do you think is impossible today that will, it's just a question of time. We're going to figure it out. That impossible will be possible in 15, 10, 20 years.
I think the biggest enabler that is impossible today that we will figure out is what they call single stage to orbit. The rocket equation basically, it's a very complicated equation, but it basically says the 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 more mass you take, the more fuel you need, 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 right? Because fuel is mass. And so, that's why we have the first stage drops off to reduce all that weight. So then the next stage is there to be lighter and to get us into space. But that's very expensive, very complicated. If we can figure out a way to do that with just one stage, you take off from runway and you are able to get to space. Because the biggest hurdle in space is overcoming the initial velocities to get into orbit, right? We say gravity, but it's gravity and the velocities to sustain orbit. And I think we will figure that out. Um, you know, but that'll be the biggest enabler because that's going to really drive down the cost to bringing things to space, including people, including infrastructure. And I think the other piece of that is which is almost impossible to, it was impossible maybe 5 years ago, but it's no longer impossible today, is these inflatable infrastructures, right? So that's something that just changed recently. Up until recently, everything was hard, everything was heavy, and everything took this big volume. But now you have these inflatable infrastructures that you can pump up, and now you can get, with one of these inflatable infrastructures, you can get a third of the size of the current space station with one launch. It's amazing. We did how many launches in the space station? I think like the 30, maybe 40 launches. I don't remember off the top of my head, but you could do a third of it with one. So I think that these impossible to possible are definitely there.
Are you able to share a couple of projects that Argotec is working on? I mean, you just mentioned the paparazzi taking photos of the of hitting the asteroid, but any other thing that is in the on the table right now?
Yeah, we're working on several projects right now. And some of those are satellites, and some actually go back to the roots of human space as well. So one of the things we're working on is we're doing another satellite to go around the moon to capture meteorites hitting the moon, and seeing all the different impacts and how that's changing the structure. We're doing one that's space weather to evaluate space weather. We're doing another one to look at the corona of the sun. You put it out there, and it's got a little uh, block in front of it to make an eclipse, if you will, and it looks at the corona. And then we're doing a constellation with ESA for Earth observation. To look at different waterways, mostly to see how the waterways are changing over the time and what is the traffic on those waterways. So those are all the things that we're currently working on. Um, but on the human side, we still, the company got its start. It's a funny story for you, a little side story. The company got its start by training astronauts for the space station missions for their payloads. And the Italian astronauts would always complain that they couldn't get a real cup of coffee, a real espresso on board the International Space Station. There was always that freeze-dried stuff that they always flew up, right? And so Lavassa or Argotec teamed up with Lavassa and said, hold my beer, watch this, and built an espresso machine for the space station. It's still on board today with unlimited use. Very, very successful. And so that's how we got our start into to doing space products. So we're still looking at those aspects, and right now we're trying to figure out, well, what's the next space enabler in these space tourism market or just space market in general? And so if you think about it, how do they eat up there right now? Well, because uh, food doesn't last very long, so you have to kind of freeze dry it, make it last longer for the missions. Water is heavy, and if you can create water in space versus bringing it up, then that can save you the weight. So a lot of the food that you still see are these freeze dried, vacuum sealed meals that they have to pour the water into. And so we're looking at a way. Well, as a tourist, if you're paying 30, $40 million for a ride, you don't want to go have a camping meal for 2 weeks. And so, they make these vending machines in Japan that almost assemble your noodles and your thing together. You hit the thing and it's all real, fresh ingredients and all that. So imagine if you can bring up a little suitcase that's your meals for 2 weeks and you can plug it into a machine that you can hit a button and they'll say, which meal would you want today? And you hit it and then it all prepares for you. I think, that's going to be one of the next biggest enablers. And we're kind of looking at those type of things.
The human experience will have to change in space, right? So far, I mean, even the training aspect so far, you had to be a pilot, you had to be able to do a bunch of things, and because of the cost and the logistic, everything has been kind of a hardcore wilderness expedition, right? The same thing as when you go up on Everest. It's really complicated, and it's not for comfort or for pleasure. It's just for the purpose of feeding you. But if we expect going, having people living in space for much longer, the experience of being there, the human experience, right? Whether it's food, whether it's anything, will have to change. And I'm really interested. That's for me. This is one of the things that really tickled my curiosity is how food will evolve, right? Is it going to be more about texture? Is it going to be different? Alcohol, right? We know that alcohol follows us everywhere. Who's going to be the first person to figure out, the type of alcohol that works? We were talking to,
It's already been in space.
it's well, the I have to connect you with Octave, who's been working with Champagne, the Mum Champagne, about developing a bottle that would recreate the ritual also of and how it would be safe. It was fascinating, really fascinating to learn. Argotech is into that, trying to transform or trying to make it more enjoyable for the food. What do you think it's? How do you think it's that area is going to evolve up in space?
I think it's more than just the food that's going to evolve. I think, you know, one of the things that I was trying to preach when we were doing the Dream Chaser was this concept of called design for X. And previously, most space vehicles are designed for utilitarian type use. I need it to go up. I need it to do this. And okay, and then you think about how do I use it secondly, right? I'm designing the vehicle to do its requirements, to do its mission, but the usability of it is always considered last, and you have to adapt to it. And so for me, design for X was survivability, sustainability, testability, but usability is a big part. And if you bring that in as early as possible, why don't we fly people with amputees today? Well, because it's unsafe, because they can't escape the vehicle in case of emergency, right? And that's why NASA can never hire them. Okay, well, can you design a vehicle so that you can fly these folks, right? And it's just a simple design change. You make it so that they can be enabled to do the things that they want to do and still be safe. And if you start putting those things into it, and you start designing the vehicle around the experience, imagine a spaceship that takes you up, and as all these different things happen, you don't realize you're going through. Hey, the first time I go to supersonic, you have a lighting thing. You can see the shockwave. Like this light comes down through the vehicle, and you can see where the shockwave is over the vehicle, or the plasma as you're coming back to Earth, and you can see something in it to visually help you understand what's going on. I think these are all things that are really going to drive the passion of people. Like, ooh, this is now. It's not just going to be this utilitarian experience. It's going to be this really fun, driving, thrilling experience that's going to cause more and more people. And so the more we can design these into the spacecraft, the more people we can get to fly, but also the better experience they're going to have. And ultimately, it's for the experience. That's why we're going.
That's the psychology behind all this, right? And that's often why we have designers having to work with engineers, because often the mind of the engineers is really about utility, how really to get from point A to point B, and there's no fluff, but it's dry. And then you have the designers who are really more about the fluff and don't want to think about how to make it work. But these two really have to bring it together so that the experience not only works but is enjoyable. And it's going to be really interesting as we go to space how that changes the design and the experience.
I mean, why does everybody love a Ferrari when a Volkswagen Bug will get you there, right? It's because of the experience and the beauty and everything. Yeah.
Corbett, you've developed a training program. You've had a really interesting career. And now from Sierra Space, Argotec, NASA, you've shared with me that you do a lot of canoe, and you're looking, one day, one of your bucket lists is the Amazon with your friend. Uh, we'll try to make it happen. I know some people. I'll connect you so that we can facilitate that. But what would be, with all, looking in hindsight, what would be three words, Corbett's three words of wisdom?
Fearless, not reckless, right? Know which risks is acceptable to take and then take it on and attack. But don't be reckless with it because that's not going to end well. So that's my motto: fearless, not reckless.
Because fears are important, right? Someone who doesn't have fear is crazy. Like there's a need and there's a necessity for fear, but then when it becomes the leader of how you behave, then this is where kind of it breaks a little bit, right?
Fear is an appreciation of the risk that you're facing, not an excuse to not face the fear or face the risk, but it's an appreciation and to make sure that you're well prepared to face that risk. If you don't have fear, then you're not going to prepare yourself. So the analogy I like to give in this one is I live by Long's Peak in Colorado, and Long's Peak is one of the most deadliest mountains in the U.S., unfortunately. And the reason for that is because it's so close to Denver, and people fly in and they see it like, I'm going to go climb that. It's one of the 14,000-foot peaks. The problem is they don't fear it enough to prepare for it. If they did a half-hour Google search, they would know how to successfully and safely climb it, hike it. Really, it's just a hike. But they don't. They go unprepared because they don't fear it. And so what we really need to do is embrace the fear, because fear just tells us, hey, we think that there's a risk ahead. How do I prepare myself to do it? Um, Instead of being reckless and just go charging in at it and being unsuccessful in the worst way.
In the technology world where risks have been camouflaged and hidden, so people live their lives and not really conscious of the complexity of how things happen in life, but also the risk, right? They go to a national park and they've watched on TV all these fun movies about wildlife and a lion and they think it's like, oh, this is like really fun, and I'm just gonna go really close and take a picture, really not understanding that you're in front of a apex predator that can literally, take your head away. Do you think like this is also a place where we have to re-educate people?
Absolutely. I think, one of the axes you see is beyond TV is all the social media, and especially these things that have these little videos. And you have professionals such as yourself who go and make the things look not dangerous, not fearful, make it look easy, navigating a river that you've never done before that you don't know has rapids ahead, right? But oh, I saw all these people, they just put their boat in and I'm going to go do this river without the appreciation and fear of what that means. And like your example, where you see, especially, we're living in Colorado, we see it all the time where in Rocky Mountain National Park, where people interact with the animals and the animals don't appreciate that because they don't have an appreciation of the risk. So I think people need to understand better, and we've sheltered them and we've taught them that uh, professionals under the right circumstances can navigate it. Unfortunately, they don't realize, because professionals make it look so easy and so fun that it doesn't translate to them. And we've protected them their whole life. If you think about it, as generations and generations keep going on, when I was a kid, my parents said, "Get the heck out of the house and don't come back until the streetlights come on." Right? Kids nowadays, parents are like, "Okay, you have to have Life 360 on your phone. I need to know where you are at all times, and don't do this and don't do this." So we've taken away their ability to even think about the risk because we've always put ourselves in between them and the risk and had them avoid it. And I think it's one of the big things that's missing.
Just one last thing, Corbett. Now that you work for an Italian company, how's your relationship with coffee? Is it improved?
So I'm learning to appreciate espresso a little more. I switched my coffee from Folgers to an espresso blend, but it's still watered down American. It's just a little bit stronger, and so I'm slowly adapting.
Excellent.
But the food over there is so amazing. I can't get enough of the food over there. Oh man, it's oh, great.
It's the human experience, right? It's the food.
It's a human
The
experience.
food is more of a human experience than for the utility of it. Corbett, thank you so very much for taking the time today, and I really hope that you will make the bucket list of the Amazon on a canoe happen. So I'll do everything that I can to help you on that.
Oh, hey, I appreciate it. This has been a great experience. I appreciate it. You're a fantastic host.
Thank you.